इंडेफिनिट छुट्टी पे है। तो ये विंटर के पीरियड में सबसे बड़ा, जो मैं पहले भी कॉलिंग को कहा था, मुझे लगता है, और ये गए 2 मीटिंगों में भी, क्योंकि मैं पॉलिसी लेवल के स्थिति तो संदीप और इन्होंने रखी है, पर मुझे लगता है ये एक टेक्निकल मामला है और मुझे लगता है ये बाकी जगह भी शायद महसूस होता होगा, कर्नाटक हो कि सभी राज्यों में हो, क्योंकि सभी राज्यों के कॉर्पोरेशन, म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन बेंगलोर या दिल्ली या बॉम्बे वाले नहीं होते पावरफुल, एंड देन फिर म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेट जो कमिश्नर होता है वो इतना पावरफुल नहीं होता कि जहाँ बिल्डिंग के टेक ओवर की गई है दूसरे डिपार्टमेंट के यहाँ, जो बहुत सारी जगह पे आपको एक चित्र मिलेगा कि मेरे ख्याल से बेंगलोर में भी, कि जहाँ एक्चुअली बनाया गया था शेल्टर होम, मुझे क्योंकि शेल्टर होम की कोई आज की बात नहीं है, उन्होंने पहले अपने भी ट्रेडिशनल शेल्टर होम बनाए हैं, पर जो दूसरे डिपार्टमेंट ने टेक ओवर किए गए हुए हैं, जैसे इलाहाबाद में भी जो टेक ओवर है वो डुडा ने टेक ओवर किए हुए हैं, मुझे अथॉरिटी ने। लखनऊ में एक बहुत अच्छा शेल्टर होम 2 है, एक तो पूरा दुकानदारों के यहाँ एनक्रोचमेंट किया गया है, इन्होंने ही बांटा, वो केसेस लीगल चल रही है, दूसरी जगह पे आवास विकास ने उठाया है। म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेटर की किसी की हिम्मत नहीं होती कि वो अन्य डिपार्टमेंट से वो खाली करवा पाए, कि जबकि वहाँ पे बकायदा मुझे वो लोकेलिटी भी ठीक है, वो फैसिलिटीज भी हो सकती है, इसलिए बांधा भी गया था, उसका पैसा भी अलॉटेड है, मेंटेनेंस का कॉस्ट भी है, और म्यूनिसिपल कमिश्नर्स को बिल्कुल मुझे लगता है कि ये टेक्निकल मुद्दा है, पर पॉलिसी लेवल पे क्या हम उसके साथ साथ डिस्ट्रिक्ट और कौन से डिपार्टमेंट को रिस्पॉन्सिबल पकड़े, ये शायद कोर्ट में हम लोगों को देखना पड़ेगा, बिकॉज उनकी बिल्कुल तैयारी नहीं है। उलट जैसे गए समय की मीटिंग में मुझे याद है हमारे यूपी के, कि जब प्रिंसिपल सेक्रेटरी थोड़ा समय उठ के बाहर गए थे, तो मुझे सब आके म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के कि हमारे सिर से हटा दीजिए, हम जमीन दे दें, पर हमको ये हमारे सिर पे आप अकाउंटेबिलिटी मत डालिए, दूसरे किसी को भी चलवाने दीजिए, सोशल वेलफेयर को करिए, डीएम को कहिए, किसी को भी कहिए, जमीन कॉर्पोरेशन की है तो जमीन कॉर्पोरेशन दे देगा, पर उसके ऊपर हम जाना नहीं चाहते, बिकॉज दे आर नॉट सेंसिटिव। वो कहते हैं हमारा स्टाफ नहीं है, हम इतने पावरफुल नहीं है, हम कुछ कर नहीं पाते हैं। मैं आई थिंक सम कॉर्पोरेशंस आर एक्सेप्शन बिकॉज दे आर फाइनेंशियली एंड ऑल, सो आई थिंक दैट्स वन पॉलिसी लेवल इशू विच नीड टू बी डिस्कस एक्चुअली ऑन द कोर्ट लीगल मैटर में क्या हो है। दूसरा मुझे लगता है कि यूपी में तो इस समय हमारे लिए जो सबसे दिक्कत होगी कि जब तक यूपी में इलेक्शंस नहीं होते तब तक इसका कौन, क्योंकि असिस्टेंट कमिश्नर देख रहे हैं, उनकी हिम्मत नहीं है एक फाइल इधर के उधर करने की, तो कोई भी इवन कोर्ट की डायरेक्शन भी होगी तो उनकी पावर ही नहीं है, क्योंकि यूपी में 75 की मुझे कहीं भी इलेक्शन ही नहीं है, वही मामला चल रहा है मेजर मायावती वर्सेस, वो सब सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक आ गया है, तो उसमें वो कब खत्म होगा, कब इलेक्शंस हो गए, तो सही में मुझे दैट्स अ वेरी पॉलिसी लेवल इशू, के हमारे लिए तो वो मेजर मामला है। तीसरा मुझे लगता है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का फर्क तो बहुत बड़ा है, मुझे हम लोग तो इतने समय से बाकी केसेस में कभी वो एमडीएम ने आईसीडीएस कभी नहीं डरे थे, वो क्यों इतने होमलेस के इशू को डर गए पता नहीं, पर वो रातों रात मुझे सब कुछ, कहाँ से हॉस्पिटल में कोई डॉक्टर रह रहे थे उनको सबको खाली करा के पोताई करके जो भी करना था उन्होंने किया। मुझे ये हुआ कि हम लोग जब गए तो कहाँ से पकड़ के लोग भी लाए गए थे, ऐसा नहीं हुआ कि शेल्टर नहीं थे। अब ये बात सही है कि वो एडवाइजर की मीटिंग खत्म हो जाने के बाद 1 महीने में वो शेल्टर सब वाइंड अप हो गए और कुछ जगह पे जैसे प्राइवेट पार्टीज को दिए गए और ये सब उन्होंने कहा, पर कंपैरेटिवली क्योंकि हम तो बाकी सभी स्कीम्स भी हम लोग मॉनिटर करते हैं, तो हमें मालूम है कि द रिस्पॉन्स वॉज वेरी इमीडिएट, और किस कारण से शायद कुछ लोग जो भी दिल्ली में जो मुझे लगता है पूरी कैंपेन हुई, आई थिंक दैट हैज हैड अ इफेक्ट एटलीस्ट सर्टेनली इन अ स्टेट नियर बाय स्टेट लाइक यूपी, क्योंकि वो डरे हैं कि लोग मरे और उसका मुद्दा न बने जैसे दिल्ली में बना। तो मुझे ये बहुत महत्व का लगता है कि कोई भी एडवाइजर कंटिन्यूसली कोई भी एडवाइजर की टीम भी पूरी जॉइंट, जैसे रजनी ने कहा कि नॉट ओनली 1 or 2 एडवाइजर पर पूरी टीम भी इसको कंटिन्यूसली मॉनिटर नहीं कर पाएगी। तो मुझे लगता है नेक्स्ट सेक्शन में बिल्डअप करना जरूरी है कि हाउ वी बिल्डअप द कैंपेन जो कंटिन्यूस इसके ऊपर प्रेशर बिल्डअप करे, कम से कम शेल्टर वाले इसके मुद्दे के ऊपर। और सेकेंड थिंग विच एक्चुअली शुड हैव कम व्हेन संदीप वाज स्पीकिंग, पर मुझे लगता है वो ज़्यादा क्वेश्चन आने के पहले, पर दैट वी शुड बी वेरी कॉशियस कि CSR ने PPP के मॉडल में हम जाने के पहले वी हैव टू बी वेरी वेरी कॉशियस, क्योंकि हम तो देख रहे हैं कि ये मुझे हम क्योंकि पॉलिसी बनाने जा रहे हैं, हम सुप्रीम कोर्ट से डायरेक्शन दे रहे हैं, और गवर्नमेंट तो कभी भी चाहेगी कि आप PPP और CSR वाले मॉडल में जाए और उनके हाथ इससे झटक जाए, और आई थिंक इट विल बी वेरी डेंजरस। तो मुझे लगता है कि वो हमारे, क्योंकि हम कानपुर का अनुभव देख रहे हैं और वो काफ़ी डेंजरस है, और मेरे ख्याल से बाकी बम्बई में भी ये पहले हुआ है और काफ़ी सैलून से, मुझे जब हम स्टूडेंट थे और जब वहाँ पे पेमेंट वेलर की बड़ी लड़ाई चली है तब भी ये CSR वाले, मतलब CSR शब्द नहीं थे पर यही सब तमाशा चला है, और प्राइवेट लॉबी एक बार आई है, आज तक बम्बई के लोग वहीं के वहीं रहे हैं, और जो लोग लड़े थे और मार खाए थे तब तो गोलियां चली थी, फायरिंग हुए थे, उनका भी कभी कुछ नहीं हुआ। द मिनट 1 मिनट प्राइवेट वालों ने एक पैर अंदर रखा, मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत, मुझे लगता है पॉलिसी लेवल में और कैंपेन में हम कैसे बिल्डअप करें, ये बहुत एक मेजर
ध्यान की जो CSR या पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप के इस वाले ड्राफ्ट में टोटली इसको बाहर करना चाहिए कि वो ठीक नहीं है इसमें।
डिस्ट्रिक्ट गवर्नमेंट डेवलपमेंट एजेंसी इंप्लीमेंट करे ना उसको,
डूडा है डिस्ट्रिक्ट, वो है, वो उसकी जिम्मेदारी ले ले।
यहाँ उस ड्राफ्ट में बहुत सारी खामियां, जैसे यूजर फी भी है जो बहुत ऑब्जेक्शनेबल है, पर अगेन मैं कहती हूँ कि सबने उस डॉक्यूमेंट को ठीक से पढ़ के कमेंट करना चाहिए. मैं क्या कहना
and are currently litigating. Here at HRL, we most of the cases we are working on, we're working on with a variety of the partners that are in this room. We're working on with a variety of the partners in this room. And I'll just mic on quickly.
Doug, please on the mic.
It's on.
It's on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
शशि उसको कहना वो माइक का
Better?
शशि माइक का आवाज
So these are the cases that we either have in court or will be in court shortly. Baljeet Nagar is probably one of the better known ones. This happened earlier this year in March. The MCD arrived one morning at about 9 a.m. And over the course of 2 days demolished about 500 houses. We were able to get an emergency stay order the second day to keep the rest of the duggies from being demolished. And that case is currently ongoing. We're at this point, we're in the process of trying to get the USID to finalize a survey of who's eligible for rehabilitation. And you can see basically where the bulldozers drove through this rather large area. Just knocking down houses left and right. It was a very large police presence there. And you can see the end result. Karol Bagh was a case this past July. It was an interesting case because it's not a very large area. It was not a notified slum. It was basically 15 families that were the descendants of some MCD employees that were originally hired to keep an area clean. So it's kind of ironic that the MCD was the agency that came in and knocked their houses down. So this was, these are pictures of the demolition actually happened. Again, a rather large police presence there. And the families were left basically on the street in the middle of the monsoon. East Kidwai Nagar is a case that came to us. It was actually, the demolition happened a couple of years ago in 2009. But it was a couple of hundred juggies that were demolished, ostensibly for something related to the Commonwealth Games. But if you go there now, they haven't done anything with the land. It's just empty. And so a lot of the families are still living there under tarps. And there was a survey done by the MCD before the demolition, but no one has been given any rehabilitation there. So at this point, we're trying to make sure that the people that have proper eligibility get that. And this is basically where the demolition happened. You can see they haven't done anything with it. The land, the kids are still studying under tarps. They're living under tarps. This was a case involving, started out as a housing case related to several thousand farmers living on the eastern banks of the Yamuna. And in the process of filing a housing rights case related to the residents, one of the few permanent buildings on the land, which was a school run by a local NGO, was demolished by the DDA. And so it took on an education-related flavor to the case. We actually got an order related to the education. We got the students admitted into a nearby MTD school, and supposedly the government is supposed to provide busing because the school is on the other side of a relatively highly trafficked road, and so it's dangerous for the students to try to walk there. But we haven't actually gotten transportation yet provided by the government. This was a picture of the school before the demolition. And this is a picture of the school after the demolition. And so the children were basically studying, taking their classes under a tree at that point. This is a more recent case, and actually made the news for some rather unfortunate reasons. In South Delhi, near Sarita Vihar, there was a village of about 70 houses. It's still not completely clear who owns the land. Everyone that we accuse of owning the land denies it. It appears that the UP Irrigation Department was the one that engaged in the demolition, which is strange because it's not a UP. In the process, one of our lawyers had actually gone during the demolition to document it, and the police and the officials there were abusing some of the residents, and so our lawyer went to the police station to file a report, and in the process was beaten up by the police. And so you can see, if this is what happens to lawyers, you can only imagine the kind of treatment that the actual slum residents face from the people that are doing demolitions. Ravidas is another case that we have in the courts. This was an area that the demolition was actually suspended after some protests. But there's several hundred families there at risk of being demolished by the DDA because they wanted to build a drainage ditch. One of the common themes in a lot of the demolitions that we deal with is complete lack of due process. No notice, or notice that's unsigned and undated, no ability to show cause against the demolition, no ability to talk to the landowning agencies about alternative plans that might be less disruptive. So we were able to get a stay on this demolition, and this was the one instance where some proposed guidelines on demolitions and evictions that we have been submitting in the PILs that we've been filing. The one instance where the court actually took cognizance of that guidelines, although we haven't made much progress on that. And then the last case is one that we're about to file. This is a case, it's rather fascinating given the documentary history of it. This is a case where the Hazard Center has been working for about 6 or 7 years. There were a variety of villages that were, or neighborhoods that were evicted, and some of the residents were moved to Bawana, but not all of them. And a number of the residents that were found ineligible should not have been. So Hazard Center has been going back and forth with the DDA for about 6 or 7 years, trying to get them to actually follow their policy and give people the rehabilitation that they are due. In the course of this, I think there have been 78 instances of bribery and corruption that have been documented and submitted to the police, and very little has been done. We're in the process of filing a case on this, but I think what this case particularly highlights is the lack of progress and lack of kind of rights vindication that individuals get, even with very persistent support from highly sophisticated NGOs. You know, when you've got someone like Bunu working on your behalf for 6 years, and you still can't get the DDA to follow their own rules, you can only imagine what a community that doesn't have the support of one of these organizations working on their behalf, they're going to get absolutely nowhere. And so I think this is a case that really highlights the obstacles that the existing landowning agencies put in people's place in their path of getting their rights vindicated. So these are the 7 cases that we have currently going before the Delhi High Court. We're also in the process of drafting and finalizing a PIL that will be filing a national-oriented one before the Supreme Court. And so the one thing I could ask from everyone here from other states is if you have reports on recent demolitions that have evidence of procedural problems where the demolitions have gone on without notice or without rehabilitation as required by existing policy, or acts of violence or injury during the evictions or things like that, we would love to get that so that we can include that in our filing before the Supreme Court. So with that, I think I've probably used most of my time.
Would you want to share a larger petition that we drafted?
So I can do that.
Yes,
I'm not sure
yes.
it makes sense to
No,
go.
but it
What I
makes sense.
can do,
Yeah.
I have so one of the things that we are doing is the guidelines that we're suggesting. That might actually be useful to walk through with people. So one of the things that we're doing is submitting the suggested protocol. That's not as good. And it's basically our suggestions for what we think a kind of a policy for rehabilitation and evictions would include if it actually follows the law and if it followed the constitutional requirements for the right to life and shelter and education and livelihood and all the things that we are fighting for in these cases. And so I'll skim through the preamble because it's a lot of just restating a lot of the principles that we talk about a lot. But in terms of the specifics, the things that we are really pushing for, first and foremost, we're pushing for evictions only to be used in exceptional circumstances and not as the standard policy. And that in situ predation should be the standard. And that all evictions should be, follow the law, follow human rights law, be reasonable, and all the things that you would think any policy would include. We also are pushing for an impact assessment to be done prior to any eviction so that the notion of what's in the public interest can really be determined. One of the things we oftentimes see is when the government puts forward an argument that an eviction is in the public interest, they don't actually include in their calculation the cost to the residents. They may say we need a drainage this year, and so that's important, but they don't also take into account that 100 people are going to lose their houses as a part of this. So we think that an impact assessment is important as part of this process. And also that the state explore alternatives, that if they want to build a drainage ditch for sewage reasons and it's going to evict 100 people, that people should have the opportunity to suggest alternative routes or locations or alternative ways to build it that will be less, that cause less destruction. We also think that the duration in which you've been living in your current location shouldn't impact your right to housing. Right now in Delhi, if you live on MCD or NDMC land, you have rehabilitation rights if you've been there since March 31st, 2007. If you live on DDA land, in theory you don't have those rights unless you've been there since 1998. As you've seen in some of the previous talks, different states have different length of time requirements for eligibility. And we're pushing to remove those, basically saying that everybody should have the right to housing, whether you've moved recently or not. Additionally, the length of the time you've been there shouldn't affect your financial contribution requirements. Currently in Delhi, if you've lived there since before 2003, you pay less than if you lived there after 2003. And the amount you have to pay is oftentimes approaching a year's salary of the people that are living there, which means that even if they're eligible for rehabilitation, they may not be able to afford it. Priority should be given to vulnerable populations.